All right, guys, welcome back. Yet another episode. This is episode 212 with your boy East Coast Trev and Mr. Madman Mardik. What up, buddy?
What up?
I can't believe the season's finally here, dude. Like, it's here. We've been
We are in
hunting.
season, baby.
I know. We don't
Thought it would
sound all
never
that
come.
happy, right? But because it's one grind to another grind into the next grind, like, it's here. We got a little nice
Grind
cold
never
front.
stops.
Nice little cold front here going on, dude. The, the only foreseeable problem I see here is this coming up weekend. The weather didn't look all that great, bro. I mean, wind. Would you see any
No,
rain or anything?
but I see all rain for the weekend, but we have the full moons the end of next week. So I would be willing to bet after this front comes through,
Mm-hmm.
I think the cameras are going to start lighting up, and I think there's going to be a lot of action going on.
Do you want to talk about what we were talking about with the full moon thing, or no? You want to skip on that?
Oh, yeah, we can talk about it.
All right, explain it to everybody
So
because I think that it's a super cool thing, and I think it's it might fill in some puzzle pieces for some of those that are super diehard camera guys.
Yeah. So, well, it'll be really super cool if it pans out to, uh, you know,
Work
come
that
to
way,
fruition.
right?
Right. So I have a particular buck that I have 2 years of history with coming into the third year. 2 years ago, he showed up on me on camera on September 18th, in the PM, just after shooting, like say 7:30 at night. Played around a year, did not kill him, found his sheds. Last year, he showed up, same camera location, on September 9th in the morning in the daylight. Didn't kill him, got his sheds, he's still alive. This year, he still has not shown up. And we're recording now, what's today, September 20th? So I'm kind of pulling my hair out, wondering where he is. Is he going to show up? When's he going to show up? Trying to go over historical data and all that stuff. And I was talking to my friend Ryan Higgins down in Georgia, and he said check the moon phases when he showed up in the past. I'm not really a big moon phase guy, to be honest with you, right? So I checked the moon phase 2 years ago when he showed up on September 18th. It was 2 days before the full moon. Last year, when he showed up on September 9th, it was the day before the full moon. So this year, I think the full moon's the 29th, which is a lot later than the last 2 years. So if it all works out compared to the last 2 years prior, in theory, he should show up next week, the 27th, 28th time frame. We'll see what happens.
I mean, dude, like we all talk about it, right? And like different moon phases, weather, so on. I mean, there's like so many stars that align, and like it just puts a lot of things in perspective when you are chasing big bucks and chasing them on moon phases. I mean, it's I think that like there's a ton to be said with that. Like guys that are fishermen, like I look at it when you talk moon phases, and moon phases play a really big role in my everyday work. So and they're creatures of habit. Same with whitetails, creatures of habit. You know, they that different stuff, and it could play a really big role on it. And I'd love to see down the road if it actually did pan out. And I mean, I hope it did. I really do hope that it did, because it will then add pieces of the puzzle.
Right. Right. I mean, there's so many other variables, right?
Of
Like
course.
when you go to historical data, you could have weather fronts, you could have, high temperatures or low temperatures and all that
Hmm.
other stuff. But you know, you just kind of got to go with what you got. And uh, for all I know, he might not show. He could show up tonight. He could not show up at all. I don't know. But if he shows up middle of next week, right before the full moon, it's going to be pretty hard to deny, right?
Right, right.
So
That
it's just cool.
it makes it all come together, man. It just
Yeah.
it's cool as hell. Dude, you been out hunting this week? What's up? Let's get a little update.
Yeah, hunted through Hurricane Lee last week.
I know
30-mile-an-hour winds.
we joined up and we did a little bit of public land running and gunning. That was kind of cool. Something a little different.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Yeah, I got out Saturday morning. I just went to a preset. Just it was just nice to get in a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Saw a couple does. Yeah, and then we linked up Saturday afternoon. Dude, you know what I that was why that was so much fun to me. I know it was an area you were familiar with. It's closer to where you grew up. I'd never stepped foot on that public in my life. I picked
Mm-hmm.
a spot on a map, looked good. I'm gonna go, and I just went in blind with the saddle and just found a tree to hang out in.
Yeah, and so I used to do that a ton as a kid, right? Like not knowing winds and so on and so forth. We would just like literally pick an area out of a hat and be like, "All right, I'm going to this area." And then we would look on the maps and say, "Okay, we're going to go hunt here." And a lot of the times we would do doubles. So we would like hunt there Friday night after work and then go back in Saturday morning and just leave our stuff in there. So you did like a good sit in there, you know what I'm saying? And we've killed a lot of animals doing that. I mean, it's super fun, especially during like that end of October, early November time. Like I talk about it, like going to Ohio and just finding and hunting the sign. It's the same thing. I mean, and it's effective, going in there and grunting and rattling, and you do. I mean, I there was one time I remember we picked a spot, went in there. I went in there and I did a rattle set in the morning on a Saturday morning, and dude, I had a super nice public land deer come in on me, and I shot and missed, but like super cool, fun, something different. You never know what's gonna come around the corner, dude. I mean, the next deer could be 180. Who knows? You don't know what's in there, dude, and there's no expectations, and it just keeps
Right.
it fun, you know.
That's the one thing I took from it the most was not scouting it, no cameras, no preconceived notion of what might be in there. So you just have that giddy feeling the entire sit because you never know what's around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'll tell you what, I would like to go back to that spot and maybe scout it maybe after the season or something because it was like the most classic Dan Infalt setup you could possibly imagine. It was a hardwoods peninsula that jetted out into the swamp like probably like 200 yards, and it was
Yep.
only I don't know, not even 100 yards wide.
Right.
Surrounded by swamp. I came in from the hardwoods. Wind was perfect, like quartering back towards me, and I'm like, oh man, if there's any deer bedding in the swamp or on the edge of the swamp, they're going to come up onto this peninsula to eat the acorns, right? It was just perfect, perfect, perfect situation. And I got in there, and just like I expected, there was oak trees everywhere, a ton of white oaks everywhere, everywhere. The whole peninsula was just oak trees,
Mm-hmm.
except none of them were producing acorns.
That's
So
crazy.
once I realized there was no nuts falling, I'm like, yeah, there's not going to be any deer tonight. But I hung out till dark anyways and didn't see shit, but it was still fun.
Well, it was super cool because, like, I was going to go to a different spot, and then I was like, you know what, let's just make some more sense. Like, you hunt down here, I'll drop you off, I'll go up the road and go in, and, like, you're like, hey, man, go check out this spot. And I go up there, and it's a complete and utterly white oak flat, and it was on the opposite side of the swamp, and, like, dude, I ended up finding a scrape, like, super cool. Like, it was just fun. Like, I'm gonna go put a camera in there, and I might potentially hunt that spot in the near future. Who knows? Just a cool little thing, and you just kind of open your eyes to doing something a little bit different. Kind of go outside your comfort realm and just enjoy it. Puts a little bit of fun back into it for me, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a perfect time to do it. It's like early season, didn't really have a lot going on for, shooter bucks daylighting on camera and my normal spots. So, of course I'm going to hunt somewhere. So pick a spot on the map, go hang out in a tree and see what happens.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, let's one of the things in this podcast that I find is pretty cool is Matt goes into talking about scents. And everything that we've always thought about going into the woods in the rain and so on and so forth, he kind of puts factual backgrounds into it. And it's kind of cool, something to definitely pay attention in the podcast. And it's definitely something that I've now decided and looked on when changing cameras and going into areas and stuff, because you always think rain and that, but Matt actually turns this around and will show you something different about it. But before we get into that, let's rip through the sponsors. And oh, do you have a Killer's Corner by any chance of any sort?
Oh, I do, but I didn't write it down. I'm unprepared. But it's only two. It's our buddy Tucker.
Yeah, beautiful
Hold on.
bison.
Yep. And then you're gonna have to help me with the other one because he actually sent it to you. It wasn't on the Facebook group. It was the wolf
Oh, in
in
Alaska.
Alaska,
Oh, hold on one
which I
second.
just a touch right here. I got it right here.
Oh, you got it? Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if he said his name.
He did.
It was from
Hold on one second.
Seward, Alaska.
Hold on.
Sam McLean, Seward, Alaska. I think he was bear hunting and he actually shot a.
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy that whole thing. So Andrew Patterson was a kid that I actually met at a local bar one night. Um, we were
Come on,
hanging.
you.
Yeah, weird, right? We
Yeah.
we were actually hanging out at the local pub near the house, and I had the e-bike in the back of the truck. I had just gotten the e-bike from Scranton Motors, Power Sports, and my boy Caddy Matt hooked me up with the Baku bike, and I had it in the bed of the truck, and he was there, and he's like, "You hunt?" I'm like, "Yeah, I hunt, man." And we ended up. I don't really remember this. Andrew kind of filled me in on the story, but I guess we took out the e-bike and we were messing around with it in the parking lot, driving it around, and it was kind of cool, and we kind of hit it off, and then we've just kind of kept contact with one another. Kind of what he does and everything. So he's a commercial fisherman in Alaska, and he sent me a picture one day, and I had given him some outdoor drive stickers, and he left them on a job site on the ground and stuff, and he sent me the picture. He's like, "This thing's been kicking around for a couple weeks now on the job site," so kind of cool. But it's cool to keep contact with him, and then he had sent in, the whole wolf thing, and we like to see that stuff, man. Like,
Yeah.
something different from different places, and who knows? It's just cool to see that kind of stuff and what everybody's got going on.
So Andrew, he's local to us, but he works in Alaska.
No, so he's actually a resident of Alaska, but he comes here to hunt from time to time. He's actually going to be here this upcoming week. He said he wanted to catch up, maybe shoot bows and grab a beer. He'll be back in the States. I think he comes here to hunt in upstate New York, and he also hunts in Ohio and stuff like that. So he just kind of travels,
Back in the
comes back.
states.
Back in the States, he's got some family here.
Why
So,
Alaska's not part of the states?
well, I mean, back on this side of
the,
Seaward,
the lower 48.
Yeah, exactly, right? I guess he's, yeah.
Well, I think we need to go visit Andrew up there. Is what I'm thinking.
Well, so it's funny, and he's invited us to go. Um, one of my biggest fears of going to Alaska is I probably won't come home. I
Mm.
enjoy, the with my resume and fishing and all that. I think it's a place for me to settle. It's been kind of on my radar lately. But
Mm.
we'll leave that for another day, especially not having too many
Yeah.
anchored roots here now. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. There's a lot of big changes to come in my future, but we'll see. It's all good. Um,
Same.
so, so yeah, yeah, it's cool, man. Congratulations to all you guys. If you guys can get onto the Facebook group, The Outdoor Drive, man, the Killer's Corner goes out every single week. We are going to be bringing back Tales from the Tailgate when we get a little bit of time here as things start to slowly open their way up. And throughout the winter, we'll get back into those Tales from the Tailgates. But yeah, get on the Outdoor Drive group over there. Guys, don't forget to, when we're on this, we'll get into the housekeeping on YouTube. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button there on any of the platforms that you guys do subscribe from. If you guys can just hit a 5-star and give us a nice review on everything, that would be greatly appreciated. That just helps us and get our word out there to others, share with friends, so on and so forth. And also, our website is back up and running. We do have merchandise on there, hats, sweatshirts, t-shirts, so on and so forth. And it's going through an online company right now, but it's actually getting switched to a local company here in the next couple of weeks. So now everybody's been asking about merchandise, so I did open that back up so you guys can get merchandise. So get on over to theoutdoordrive.com and get that stuff there. While we're on all this, let's get into sponsorships. We are brought to you by and title sponsored by Huntworth, huntworthgear.com. If you guys have not seen or used or bought Huntworth gear, now's the time to get on over there. There is a sale going on. They always have sales. I believe it's a 20% sale. Steve, do you know the promo code on that one there? I believe it's
I
Hunt 20 September or something to
Yeah, but
that.
HNT Hunt.
HNT 20 SPT.
SPT.
Correct. I
Correct.
will put the link below with the promo code there. Seriously, their early season stuff is out of control. Their Elkin stuff also for a little bit colder mornings, those 50-degree mornings. Great gear. Heat boost is by far going to be your best tool come late season. What were you saying there, Steve?
Don't forget the Shelton hoodie.
Oh,
The
always the
best. It's the
Shelton
bomb.
hoodie. Yeah, it's probably the best thing going with the built-in mask. It's a great product, probably one of the best. And this stuff does last. I mean, we've put it through the ringer, and it definitely holds up to what we got going on. Nor'easter Game Calls, nor'eastergamecalls.com to get your one-of-a-kind custom grunt tube. The best grunt tube on the market, hands down, fully 100% custom, and it gets them in close. It's just the way of a good world. I love mine. I use mine all the time. I'm waiting for that late October, early rut. I mean, I'm ready to get that thing rolling.
Just ready to give it a blow.
Ready to give her a blow. Oh, Manny, dude, we need to get him back on. Also, latitudeoutdoors.com. Guys, Latitude Outdoors, I had made a post a couple of days ago about Latitude and kind of what they got going on. They do have it's called, the promo code is rope upgrade for their 10 millimeter ropes. And it's 25% off. It's very important, and me and Steve both upgraded our ropes for this season because we've been using them for a couple of years, and it's always nice to keep on tabs on what's going on with your ropes. That's your lifeline. That's to make it so that you can make it home to your family safe at night. It's a great thing to have. Even use tree stand hunters to upgrade your ropes. Even if you bought a 10 millimeter rope from Latitude at 25% off, and that's what you use to attach yourself to the tree with your regular tree stand harness. It's a great thing to use. And I mean that's what I normally use to attach myself into the tree. Is a nice Latitude rope. So get on over there,
The other
guys.
thing,
Oh, go ahead.
just one thing, two things to touch on with the Latitude ropes. One, they come with all the hardware you need. So if you're buying a tether, you get everything you need to run it as a tether. If you're buying a new linesman rope, you get everything you need as a linesman rope. Some of the other companies, you get the rope and you have to get all the other pieces too to like build your tether or your linesman. Getting your ropes from Latitude is you get everything you need for your tether or your linesman. I know a lot of other companies out there, you get the rope, but you don't get all the hardware, and you have to buy all your carabiners and stuff separately. That's not the case with Latitude. When you order a tether, it comes as a tether ready to go, and same thing with a linesman. And then the other thing, if you already have a mechanical aider like a ropeman, that will work with the 10 millimeter rope, which is the rope that the promo code works for. Which is important to know because if you were to get the 8 millimeter rope like I got, your ropeman one will not work with that rope. So the 10 millimeter is definitely the way to go if you already have a ropeman one or
It
a ropeman two.
it will work with a Kong duck though. Also, guys, so make sure to get on over
Yep.
there. And if you are going to use anything other than your rope upgrades, make sure to use the promo code Outdoor Drive. You will get yourself also a save on that one there too. Good promo code to use there. Last but not least, Bowhunters United. Bowhuntersunited.com. Guys, link is below. Sign up for that. You can get deer and deer hunting. They're advocates for the bow hunting world. Sends all kinds of great stuff out to kind of keep what's going on in legislative, new bills, so on and so forth. They will pre-write the bills and or the letter you're going to send to your spokesman, and then you can just kick it on over there and kind of keep informed of what's going on. They are the advocates for the bow hunting world. So, well, man, I think it's time that we break in to go and see what Matt's got to say. So this is a part 2 of after the shot, prepping for after the shot. We talk a little bit about tracking with the dog. We talk a little bit about everything. I think it's a great podcast. Matt does a very good job with it. And, it might be about dogs. It might be, about some of the things that may not be effective to you guys, but just read between the lines because this can be translated as your everyday hunting purposes and definitions, in my opinion, right? Where you can use this stuff in the woods constantly. So let's
Absolutely.
let
One
oh
thing I
god.
do want to throw out there. No, just real quick. Now that we're in season, and I've always found this very important growing up. When I shoot a deer, your first phone call or your first and second phone call is very important. Like who you call and what
Mm-hmm.
what you tell them, because you need somebody to tell everything that happened to, right? Like what the deer was doing, the angle, the shot, where you think the arrow hit, and all that stuff. Um, I'm just gonna throw it out there. If anybody gets in a jam with a questionable shot,
Mm-hmm.
especially our listeners, if you're in Eastern Connecticut, I'm usually always willing and able to come help somebody track a deer.
For
So
sure.
reach out to me on Instagram, Madman Mardic. I can usually come and help. And even if you're too far away to help, even if you have questions, reach out. I'll walk you through some, what happened and what I think, or and give my best word of advice as far as how much time to wait, or any kind of question like that. Don't be shy. I'm more than willing to talk to anybody about stuff like that.
And same goes for me too. You guys can reach out to me, East Coast Trev. I can walk you through a lot of things. I'm more than willing to go and help if the time's available. There's, I'll give you my thoughts and my opinions if you just need someone to talk to and kind of calm you down through the situation. We've all been there, and just have an
Right.
outside perspective. Feel free to reach out to us, guys. I mean, Instagram, Facebook, through the group, whatever you want to do. We are here for you guys. Actually, it's funny, and I want to kick this podcast off, but before we do it, one of the things that I used to do a ton of when we were more like Connecticut based and I had ctbowhunting.com, what we used to do,
Mm,
we used to do
no.
a hunters helping hunters list. So you would send in your name and your number. And what you would do is if you wanted to be on the list or you knew that you needed to get the list, you would send me your name and number and then I would compile a whole entire list and the town that you lived in and then you could reach out to people in the area. And it's just a good way. Like just kind of always think about that. Think of who you're going to call and talk to, after the shot if you have any questions. Social media is not always the greatest thing to be asking questions on. And,
No, the
so
worst.
to reach out to somebody that's willing to help and has the experience, I mean, I'm here to stand on one leg, dude, and help you out. I mean,
Right.
it's just the way it goes. So, well,
Well, I
let's.
was just thinking about it the other day. Now that the season's open, the jet
Mm,
sleds in the back of the truck. It ain't coming out till January.
right.
I got my little. I made sure everything that I needed was in my little tracking pack. That
Mm-hmm.
stays in the truck, and I always keep an extra pair of boots and socks and some, extra pair of
Yeah.
pants and all that stuff, because you never know
Who's gonna call?
what when you're gonna get a phone call from a
Yeah.
buddy or somebody, and sometimes it's right after work,
Yep.
and I'm ready to go help whoever needs help.
I'm the same
You
way.
know.
I miss it. I miss it a lot. So, all
You
right,
got your glow
guys.
sticks ready?
No, I got my glow sticks, dude. Snapping the glow, dude. Just always snap the glow.
Popping that money stick.
That's right, dude. Always worth cracking a money stick. Well, boys, let's get on. Let's get Matt on, dude. Let's listen on to this podcast, and we'll catch you guys next week.
You are now listening to the Outdoor Drive Podcast.
All right, guys, we are back with part 2 with Matt from Tales on Trails. Matt, how we doing, buddy?
Hey man, I am fantastic, man. How are you guys?
Good. I'm excited about part 2 of this one. Guys, if you guys missed out on it, you might want to just kind of hit the pause button on this one, go back to 211 and start from the beginning. You can kind of hear what Matt is and what he does and this, that, and the other thing, because we got a lot to lift back up on. And I think, honestly, my opinion, let's start right with where we left off on the coyotes and what this has to do with tracking and we're just gonna go forward from there. What do you guys think?
Yeah, works for me, man. I'd love to tell you about it.
All right. So what's your opinion on when you are tracking? What to do when maybe there's coyotes in the area, or what do you think they play a big part in the tracking aspect of tracking?
So coyotes are always fun because they can get to your deer. But the biggest thing about the coyotes are, people want to push a track too soon. They want to hurry up and recover their deer. They don't want to leave it overnight because there's coyotes in the area. Well, there, and I get that. And depending on the circumstances, maybe you could pursue that track a little bit earlier than you would like to if all of the other circumstances stack up. But you do run a pretty significant risk. And here's the risk. See, first of all, coyotes in the area doesn't make your deer dead any faster. Just because there's coyotes in the area doesn't mean your deer's going to die faster. Set aside the coyote getting your deer and killing it. That's not what I'm getting at. You can't recover your deer if he's not dead. So just because there's coyotes in itself is not a reason to push sooner, because it causes greater risk of coyotes getting to your deer first. So what I mean by that is, remember we talked about in part one that if a deer, is mortally wounded, that gut, that liver, that one lung gut, whatever it is, it's not going to go very far. It's going to go maybe 200 yards before it beds down. Trev, that deer, that scenario we role played in part one, your deer was only 50 yards beyond. So your deer only went 150 yards before it bedded down and died.
Right.
Okay. That is very, very common. So if you think about it, the coyotes only have 150 yards to cut that deer track and pick up that wounded deer. If you pursue, oh my gosh, there's coyotes, I got to get this deer, and he's not dead because you're pursuing it 2 hours when he needs 12, and you jump the deer, and now he runs for another 7, 8, 900 yards, you have just now created 1,000-yard track for that pack of coyotes or that one coyote to intersect, to pick up your wounded scent of your deer and get to him first. So the farther your deer goes in the woods, the greater the chance of a coyote getting to it. So don't let coyotes in the area be a reason to pursue it too soon. You're just increasing the opportunity of the coyotes getting them.
So, Matt, it's kind of funny, and this is probably not fair, but so me and Steve and some of the other boys had dinner last night, right before season. So we're kind of talking about the podcast at hand, right? Part one, so on and so forth. And Steve brought up a very valid point, and I definitely want to bring this up. But even if, and this is just an opinion base, right? If that deer is going only 150 yards and it's now bedded down or whatever, and it's in that first bed, and if that wind is, say, coming northeast, wouldn't there be a scent cone that's emitting from that deer that they could find, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, that could absolutely happen. But in that case, I guess just like anything, the coyotes do have to be downwind of that. Whereas if that's going to always be the case, no matter what, they're always going to be emitting scent because you just can't avoid that. But, anytime you can minimize the wounded deer's footprint in the woods, you reduce the opportunity for a coyote getting it. But yes, the scent cone, the scent, all of that is still a valid factor in coyotes finding your deer first. Yeah, and there's no avoiding that.
No, of course, and obviously coyotes are sly, and they're constantly on the hunt, and I mean there's a lot of variables to it, and of course and the big point in this obviously is that it's not a reason to go and find your deer when it's not fatally dead at that point anyways, like a coyote. That's the big point of it. I was just asking, I'm just throwing a curveball in the mix. That's all.
No, that's not curveball at all. It's legit.
And going along with that, we had talked previous about scent pool in this. So is that making a scent pool with it laying down right then and there?
Yeah. Absolutely. The longer anything that creates scent, which by the way is you and me and everybody else in a tree, anything that creates scent, the longer it is in an area, the bigger the scent pool becomes. And that is a factor in dog tracking. And it's common for that to, it's almost a proximity alert to some degree for dog handlers. If everything is stacking up that your deer is dead and your dog is tracking, has been tracking nose to the ground right along like a hound dog does, and then all of a sudden the dog's head starts coming up and he starts wind air scenting, checking the wind a lot, and almost seems excuse me, a little bit confused or just in search mode. You're probably in the scent pool and you're probably close to finding that deer. So everything creates a scent pool. So, that's something to think about as hunters. When you're in the tree, the longer you're there, your scent, no matter how much dead downwind spray you use or how many ozonics you have going, that stuff, I do believe that it helps. It does not eliminate your scent. It just, you're not going to fool a deer's nose totally 100%. Your scent is still there to some degree, and the longer you're there, the bigger the scent pool it is that you're creating. So yeah, scent pools are a real thing and can be problematic.
And it's probably something to go along with the lines of like guys that are in their hunting in the morning and the wind changes to the wrong direction, and then you kind of don't spend that much more time in the tree because now you're putting even more scent downwind.
Yeah, right. And you're right, scent pool. So when the wind is blowing, 12, 15 miles an hour, your scent is pretty decisively moving one direction. But when that wind is constantly, shifting, or perhaps there's no wind. Let's say it's one of them beautiful October mornings, where it's 32 degrees, dead calm, a light frost on the ground, all of the stuff that we love as hunters, and it's dead still. Your scent is just emanating out and creating this pool. It just is. And again, so scent discipline is huge. Wind is huge in hunting, and dog handlers occasionally will use the wind to wind search if you lose a track. We don't like to do that mostly, but nonetheless, it is scent is scent, no matter what it is or what you're doing with it. It's there and it's moving and it does what it does, and you can't control it.
So now this has really kind of got me shocked because when you're tracking a deer, you're not really using the wind to your advantage like you would with any other sport dog.
No, generally no. What a dog tracker wants to do is get to the point of impact, and most of us want our dog to be his nose on the ground and tracking, I'm going to say step for step where your deer was. Now there, if for some reason we can't, we lose, we track along and all of a sudden the dog just loses it, and when we can't figure it out, or maybe the track is just too old, and we want to try to help find a deer, but it's too old to track. We can use the wind to our advantage and search areas that the deer may have gone, and we can search downwind. And the dog then, that's how I found my last recovery last year. The wind was blowing right for. I did a little. It wasn't a podcast, but I put a little video up on my Facebook page about it. It was just the dead deer was just scent was blowing right back towards the shot site, and the dog's nose went up and marched me right to it 300 yards. Her nose never went to the ground. So she didn't track that deer, but we recovered that deer because she air scented it. So yeah, there are tactics, but generally speaking, you know, people, handlers want their dog to track the deer step for step within reason to that deer.
And is there, so I guess in the dog tracking world, does that deer emit a certain smell that they know that it's that one deer? Like if you're in like a
Oh yeah,
corridor of a lot of deer, or because they're going to get
yeah.
into areas where there's a ton of other deer, how do they know to stay on that one track?
That's a great question and a great topic. So I'll can I back up from before I
Yeah,
answer that, Trev,
yeah,
and kind of talk about the dog's nose
yeah,
and everything that the deer, that the dog is tracking,
for
and
sure.
then okay. So, if we talk about the dog's nose, a dog's nose is incredible. And I'm gonna reference bloodhounds because that's what I have. People have about 4 or 5 million scent receptors in their nose. A bloodhound has 300 million. That kind of gives you a feel for the flavor. What is that? 60 times, roughly 60 times better than a human. You know, 300 million scent receptors. So, a bloodhound is also the only animals whose findings are admissible in a court of law. So that doesn't say that a bloodhound is any better at recovering deer than a German Shepherd or a Bavarian Mountain Hound or a European Teckle or a Catahoula Cur Dog or any of the other dogs, a Beagle, a Basset, a Lab. You know, those are all those noses. They have generally less scent receptors than a bloodhound. Maybe that 200 to 230 million, but it's still plenty adequate for recovering deer. Now, so we just talked about how good a bloodhound's or a dog's nose is. A deer's nose is believed to be about 30% better than that.
Wow.
So, in to give you a little feel for the flavor of how incredible a dog can work. A friend of mine in the tracking network legitimately tracked, did not, this wasn't air scenting, but legitimately tracked and recovered a deer 120 hours after the shot.
With a
Yeah,
bloodhound?
it was a bloodhound. Yeah.
Wow.
Now the scenting conditions were really good, and scenting conditions we'll talk about those in a minute, but that stacked up perfectly. All of the stars aligned, and that dog was able to track 120 hours after the deer was shot to a recovery. Incredible. A deer's nose is better.
Was there any variations in there? Like, did they not go on the track, or like,
Yeah.
because we had talked previously, like the things to do, the right and wrong things to do when calling a tracker, right? Like, don't track too
Yep.
long, don't step on the track, so on and so
Yep.
forth. Was there variables to that, to why it took
Yeah,
120
I'd
days
have to remember.
or
I'd have to
24 hours?
remember. Yeah, I'd have to remember the details. I'll
Yeah,
have to touch base with Glenn now. But if I feel like the track was managed pretty well. They didn't
yeah.
they didn't grid search it. They didn't do anything, so it was a
Right.
pretty clean track. So that certainly played a factor. I would imagine Daisy would have had a hard time after at 120 hours after a grid search.
Right, which is, no matter what it is, it's absolutely amazing, man. I'm
Oh
just
yeah.
trying to put the scenario together. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I wish I had more of the details. I just don't recall them as I sit here right now. So you ask what a dog is smelling, and that's a great question. So, we talk about, you hear the term blood trackers. The national organization, which, by the way, I'm going to talk about them a little bit. The United Blood Trackers is the national organization. Um, they have blood in it, but which creates a belief that a deer needs or a dog needs blood to track. That is absolutely not the case. a deer does not need blood to track. So let's just clear that up right now. If you need a dog, if you can't find your deer, but you don't have blood, don't think that it's not worth calling it. Oh, there's no blood. I can't call a dog. Well, if you have blood, you don't need a dog. So a dog doesn't need blood to track. So don't hesitate to call a dog if you can't track your deer because they don't need blood. So, okay, if they don't need blood, what is the deer tracking? Great question. Trackers refer to it as the scent cocktail. And, there's probably more than we really know that it could ever know as far as humans what a dog is smelling. But, the interdigital gland, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail here in a minute, but the interdigital gland, dander, skin, dead skin cells that are constantly falling off the deer, any hair, any blood, microparticles of blood, that maybe you can't see but are there, any wound gases, there's a hole in your deer somewhere, so there's something coming out of it. And here's one that might be a bit of surprise to people is the deer's breath.
Oh, really?
The deer's breath. Yeah, there was a experiment done. I wish I could cite the details, and I'll have to look it up. But and I don't know what type of dog they used, but it was a man trailing experiment where the person put on a hazmat suit. So all of the dead skin cells, all of the body odor and all of the things that come off a person was being contained within the hazmat suit, and this person went off, and the tracking dog, I don't know, like I said, I don't know if it was a bloodhound or a shepherd or Malinois or what it was, they found that person without any trouble whatsoever, and it was his breath. He didn't have a hood on, so his breath was coming out in going to the ground. So when you're chewing your spearmint gum in your tree stand, your deer can smell it. So those are a lot of the things in what we call the scent cocktail. They also might be smelling disturbed ground, broken vegetation. All of that factors in and is part of the scent cocktail or the scent profile of that deer. So that's why when we're tracking, we like to start as early in the track as possible, preferably the shot site if reasonable to do so. And we like to have that dog track through the hunter's point of loss so it has that, however long that is, to acquire the scent profile for that specific deer. And when it gets off, it knows what it's looking for. So, we talk about the first thing I mentioned was the interdigital gland, and I think you'd asked probably before we started recording. How does it, or maybe it was while we were recording. How does it know which deer to go after when there was 20 of them in the food plot? Well, it's all of that scent cocktail, and the big thing is the interdigital gland. So the interdigital gland, for those who don't know, it's a gland at the top of the foot, right in the middle of the foot, above the hooves, and it creates it secretes secretions. And the interdigital gland is how deer communicate. It's how they identify each other in the woods with all of the other glands. The forehand gland. Oh shit, Charlie's been here. Big Bob's been here. I don't want to rub on this tree. If I'm Little Bill. But the same thing with the interdigital gland. It's how a buck can follow a specific doe. It's that individualized scent being secreted from the interdigital gland, and it weeps down between their toes. It gets on the hair follicles at the tips of the hair on the bottom of their foot, and it leaves that specific scent for that deer in the on the ground. When that old donkey doe has pinned you in the tree stand and she starts snorting and stomping her foot, well, what she's doing, I remember when I was a kid, I used to think, oh, she's trying to get you to move. Well, no, she's not. What she's doing is she's stomping her foot and really pressing in that interdigital scent, because now it's emitting an alarm scent. So she's stamping that ground. When a buck is scraping the scrape, he's leaving his individual interdigital gland scent in that scrape. and then his preorbitals on the licking branch and all of that stuff. So the reason that's important for tracking is because when a deer is wounded, stressed, or alarmed, it starts to emit this stress pheromone, and it emits the stress pheromone through the interdigital gland. And as long as that deer continues to, is mortally wounded, that stress pheromone continues to emit and just gets stronger the closer to dying that deer gets. So, so that is how the dog can individually pick out the deer. Plus all of the other things in the scent cocktail. But the interdigital gland, I call it the primary ingredient in the scent cocktail. And in most trackers, a lot of us anyway, that is how we're training our dogs. We're using deer hooves that will attach to specialized shoes, deer hooves of deer that have been mortally wounded and ran for a period of time to start to emit that stress pheromone. We save those hooves, we fasten them to the bottom of our shoes, we lay a scent trail, let it age for however long you want to let it age, then you put your dog on it. I think there's only 2 or 3 tracks this year that I used any kind of blood at all for training. Most of the time, it's just hoof. We call it hoof only in the tracking world, and we're using that wounded deer hoof. So that's how the coyote knows when it crosses, 1,000 deer paths in the woods. It knows, hey, I'm going to follow this one because it knows that deer is wounded. It knows that deer is weak. It knows that deer is old. That's how the coyotes, the wolves, that's how they do that. And a dog is the same way. That's how it decides, which deer it wants to go. We want it to go after.
That's
Sorry for the
wild.
long-winded.
No,
Yeah.
I that's great information. Like that's super cool to hear that, because a lot of people don't talk about the glands and how
Yeah.
these deer communicate, through that stuff. It's something that, I just started dabbling in, and I know Steve started dabbling in not all that long ago with the whole interdigital and scrapes and glands and so on and
Yeah.
so forth, because it is how they communicate. But I didn't realize that there was a stress hormone that came out in it to then so that the dogs can know which one is which, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep, for sure. And it can take a couple of times, especially if you're in a food plot and with multiple deer, it may take a restart or two for it to get on the right line. But generally speaking, they're pretty good at picking up the right deer, especially if you get them started in the right spot. They're pretty good at it. One of the things, as a tracker, when there is no blood, it's frustrating. Because you want to see blood as for yourself to visual confirmation to know your dog's on it, but you really want it to prove to the hunter that your dog is on it, because the hunters seldom really understand, and not that they should, but they just don't really understand what the dog is tracking in the scent cocktail and how it all works. So there's always doubt. When you've gone 400 yards and you haven't seen one drop of blood. How do you know how do we know your dog's on it? Well, yeah, I guess I don't know for sure, but this is what my dog is telling me. I have no reason to believe she's not. For that 150 yards we did have blood, she nailed that trail, and her body language is telling me it's the right deer. And one thing that I have come to use as an indicator that the dog is tracking the deer we're after when there's no visual sign is, a deer doesn't always run straight. It'll turn, it'll jump over something. So there will come a point in the track where the dog loses the line. So then the dog will start to do its problem solving. And as a handler, it's your job to recognize when the dog is in problem solving mode and stay the hell out of the dog's way so it can solve the problem. And if the deer turns and the dog overruns, especially young dogs that like to track fast, they might miss a turn and they'll overshoot it. Well, they'll go down and pretty soon they're going to pick their head up. They're going to turn around and come back. They're going to start to circle until they reacquire the line, and then they're going to go again. And when we're tracking along and we don't have blood, and I know the hunter's doubting it, and sometimes they'll say something, I'll use that moment that Baru, that's my dog's name, Baru, when she stops and starts to problem solve, I'll say, this is an indication that she knows which deer we're looking for. Because if she wanted to track just any deer, there's lots of tracks here she could go after. But she's trying to find your deer, so and it's all that scent cocktail and that interdigital scent and all of the dying scents and smells and all of that. So it can be fun. I recovered one last year. It was a gut shot. um it took a restart or two, but there was the only evidence of a hit I saw was didn't even have the arrow, was hair about 10 yards from the impact site, just a little bit of hair, not one stitch of blood that I saw anywhere, nor did the hunter. And the dog recovered that deer just on the other side of a creek.
Wow. And will they lose them because of a crick though? Like, what do they do in the scent of throughout that? They just try and pick it up on the other end.
Yeah, the dog knows, and the track that I had during the youth season this last weekend on September 9th. um, the deer crossed this little tiny river, moderate creek, whatever you want to call it, twice, because it snaked back and forth, and there was like maybe a 40 or 50-yard gap between where it curved, and the deer crossed it twice. And we had blood right up to the creek, and the dog, she got to the creek, and she worked down one way and came back, and she wanted to go. She knew right where that deer had crossed, and she just needed me to say go ahead. And she did a dock dive into the creek. I posted it. You'll have to go to the YouTube channel and check it out. It's kind of fun. But yeah, they know, and they can work it out. It's like I said, it's that problem solving. So an experienced dog, they're going to come up there. If they don't know exactly where it crossed, they're gonna work that bank and try to find it. A lot of times a deer will go into maybe a hard bottom creek and work up the creek and exit the same side it went in. And that's just part of the tracking team, the dog and the handler working together, the handler being able to understand what the dog is telling it in its body language. And that comes from time behind your dog on practice tracks and real tracks. And it comes from the dog just gaining experience, so they know that, okay, I'm at water. And scent floats in that water too, particularly if it's not really flowing hard. That scent will surface, and they can smell it, and they can pick it up. So if your dog can't, then the tactic of the handler is, okay, we know the deer did something. It either crossed it or it looped back around. So now you can just walk the bank of that creek on one side. If she doesn't reacquire, then you can cross the creek, go to the other side, walk the bank, and the dog will reacquire if she doesn't do it by herself. That's ways to handle it. So water is really no problem. It can be an obstacle. It can be a check depending on how fast it's flowing, how deep it is, and how wide it is, and how far the deer. Factors come in, but generally speaking, it's not a game stopper.
Man, in all these years of watching Hollywood movies, I thought that all the bad guys always got away after they went through water.
Yeah, yep, that's Hollywood, man, for sure. And it can help. I mean, so we talked about, do deer always go to water? Well, no, they don't, but it can be an evasion tactic for them. When they're still alive, they may, there's been plenty of deer that have been bait up in the water because they're going to water, not because they're thirsty or whatever, but because they're trying to use that as a means to evade the threat, and so it can be. But no, man, generally speaking, in most normal circumstances, the water's not that big of a deal for the dog.
I've always looked at it as they head for cover, right? So
yeah,
two theories of that. Like, you got the theory of deer always, they won't run uphill. They always run downhill when they're mortally wounded, and they always run for water. Yeah. Well, where that could come from is there's usually thick cover in water, around water, and water's usually in the bottom. So they run downhill towards the water, but I think they're just really heading for cover.
So a deer is gonna, when it's wounded, it's gonna try to get back to where it is most comfortable.
Right.
So if it's going to take the shortest and most efficient path to get to where it is comfortable. It wants to get to a bedding area. It wants to lay down. And if there's water on the way, great. If not, great. If it's uphill, they're going uphill. If it's
Right.
downhill, they're going downhill. They don't give a shit about any of that stuff. Now if it takes 3 or 4 days to die, then that's a different story. It may be intentionally seeking out water and stuff like that. That's why, one of the things I talk about, a deer wants to get to where it's comfortable, is one of the things that you ask the hunter is this deer one you've seen before? Are you familiar with this deer? Because if it is, it's probably not far. You're in its home range, and it wants to stay there. It will die there. If it's just a transient deer because it's November 10th, and if that's not its home range, it's going to be full tilt boogie. Try to get back to its home range because that's where it's comfortable. Now, hopefully, it doesn't make it that far, and so that's just, and that's also. Also something to consider when you don't recover the deer and you keep your cameras out, because if you don't recover the deer because it's a high shoulder, a back whack, like we talked about in part 1, you are very likely to see that deer again on camera if you're running cameras. If it's not a home range deer, you may not ever see him again. You may not really know for sure.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. Like, to go uphill, if there's big cover uphill, they're gonna go uphill. They don't care. Like, their adrenaline's going. They don't. Are they gonna go up there? 9 times out of 10, they're gonna try not to, unless they're like really mortally, hit. But the thing is, by the time that they go up the hill, then their blood's gonna be pumping. They're probably gonna die on the side of the hill. Because you do see that too, and they get to go up that, I mean, they're wild animals. They're, I say that a lot when we go tracking, like, they're wild animals. They can do anything. There's no book written on what they should do when they're hit. I mean, like, they can do anything. You can never be too sure, and have that mindset that you know what they're gonna do. You have no idea what a deer is going to do.
You don't know what they're going to do. That's right. That's what I've heard. I haven't had this myself personally yet, but I've heard many a story of hunters telling the tracker that my deer didn't go that way. I saw my deer run this way. Well, my dog wants to go that way. I'm going to follow my dog, and then I'll be damned, however many yards later, they're over the deer, and the hunter's totally baffled. I can't believe my deer went that way. Yep. Your deer went that way, man. The dog knows.
And their adrenaline's going. We talked about this in part 1. Like, there's a lot of telltale signs to listen to, and we should probably reiterate on this, or whatever that word is. Where taking the picture and pointing.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's absolutely amazing. Pay attention to land features, whether there's a rock, a split tree, whatever, a juniper bush, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, definitely. Just absolutely mark the last spot you saw that deer. And like we talked about, I'm an advocate of taking your phone out, putting your finger in the frame, pointing to whatever landmark you're trying to indicate, so you have that visual reference when it's 3 hours later, completely dark, and you're on the ground and not in a tree. That's to me, it's a pretty big deal, because you might need that visual reference at some point.
Another thing I was thinking too, after you said that wouldn't be a bad idea now that everyone has cell phones. Take your phone out, put it in video mode, and talk to the camera and tell them everything you remember seeing. Where you think you hit it, what the deer was doing, what it did when it got hit, what the tail was doing, because we all know 2-3 hours later, you start changing the story in your head. You think you saw this, you start convincing yourself you saw other things. But if you take your phone out and just tell the story to your camera, you can always go back, and you can't change your story. You told your camera what you saw.
You're playing telephone with yourself.
Yeah.
But that's a great point, Steve. And I've heard somebody else say that, and I guess I've never thought of it since I heard that, but just create, document, get that audio documentation of what you saw, video, audio pointing that was that tree right there. He jumped, he flinched, he wiggled, he waggled, he what the hell evered. That's an excellent point.
Do
Yep.
you ever have like crazy instances with hunters that you've done tracks for, and then like they just like totally don't believe you at all? Like they get mad or upset like when a dog doesn't get on a track because like you're going into a shitstorm more or less. Like you're going on the
Kind of.
downwind
Yeah.
side or the downhill side of this whole entire situation, and they
Yep.
think that you show up with a cape on with a big S on it, and you're gonna fix all their problems.
Yeah. I personally have not run into that, but I don't have a lot of tracks. Remember,
Right.
it's coming. I am going to run into that, but it does happen. I like I said, I listen to trackers. I know trackers I talk to in the network chat. You see it on video, other YouTube videos, other podcasts, people talking, trackers talking about it. But it absolutely happens because what did they see? They saw their arrow hit. They know that deer is dead, and they have a hard time believing that they did not put a mortal shot on that deer. So yeah, they're out there. It happens occasionally. I had one hunter last year. It was the second time I tracked for him. The first time, and it's a super nice guy. I would track for him again in a second. The first time was a bow shot. It was a quartering towards. I'm the dog tracked it we for quite a ways. We advanced the track pretty well. Again, crossed a creek, found the arrow floating in the creek, and then pretty much after that, I think the deer had bedded down along that creek. And so let me just talk about. We talked about the stress pheromone and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. When a deer is not mortally wounded, it's going to emit that stress scent as it's initially startled, and then as it goes and beds down and it starts to assess itself and it realizes it's not going to die, it will quit emitting that stress pheromone.
Mm.
So now all of a sudden it smells like all of the other deer in the woods, and that's when you see dogs might track like a machine up to the wound bed, and then after that they just like they lost their damn minds. Well, it's because the scent changed. Your deer's not mortally wounded, and I think that's what happened with this guy. It was a quartering towards shot. Bows and shoulders do not mix. Shoulders win every time. Stay the hell away from the shoulder. Just stay away from the shoulder. But it was a quartering shot towards. He hit it more forward, and I don't believe for one instant that deer was dead after I tracked it, and I believe that the scent changed. But so and he was receptive of that. He called me during gun season, which he was I tracked from at some point in November, October, and then in Michigan, our firearm season opens on November 15th. Happy birthday to me, by the way. But he called me and he shot a deer. He definitely hit it. There was blood. It reacted. It kind of stallioned, went up on its hind legs, and we tracked it, and there just came a point where the dog kind of started having a hard time, and we did come to it was on state land. We come to a property stop. It was a small chunk of property, but I have to trackers have to respect boundaries. If we don't have permission, even though I can see across the property, we really can't be crossing it, particularly when there's a bow stand and a camera right there, like there was in this case. I just can't do it. So he got permission for several properties around it, but I had to stop, pull her off the track. Well, that's one of those deals where, you know, she tracked along, and then it come on the edge of the state land to private property this way, and a whole bunch of state land and thick stuff over here. There were some houses and kind of set back in the woods. Well, the hunter was convinced that his deer would not go that way, and it should have went up here. And I reset her. We went back. I says, Evan, the dog has taken me here twice. Your deer went this way. I can't cross this property. So, he went and got permission for the other properties, and we looped all the way around on the state land, come back up, and she just couldn't reacquire the scent. And I don't know if that deer was dead or not. I just don't know. I'm thinking maybe not, but Evan was as nice as he could be, but he was pretty disappointed. that I wouldn't cross that property, and he couldn't find the deer. He said, I know it's dead. I'm like, buddy, he went back out and, the next day and looked all over hell and couldn't find it. So I'm not convinced that it was dead.
Is Michigan one of those states you can't go on to private property no matter what?
You have to have permission. Yeah,
Have to have permission.
we have no right to cross boundaries without permission with a dog or anything.
And obviously now being a registered tracker and all this other stuff, it could always come back on you that
Yeah.
you did that. Okay.
Yeah. Now you're trespassing, and even if you're not registered, you are always bound by the rules of trespass, and yeah.
Because some state, I mean, like Ohio, for example, you need to have permission to go on that private land. Where Connecticut, what is Connecticut's deal, Steve?
You need permission.
Oh, you do. Okay. All right.
Posted or not posted, you don't cross that line.
Yeah, same Michigan. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I guess there's. Yeah. I don't know if
But there are states, and I'm at a loss for an example, but I know there are states that if you can pursue, if you're pursuing a deer, you don't have to have permission. Now, what the nuances are of whether you can have a firearm or what, blah blah blah, whatever.
Right.
But there are states where it's legal to do it.
Well, like Massachusetts, if it's not posted, you can go on it.
Okay.
Maine,
Yeah.
if it's not posted properly, you can go on it.
Properly posted.
Properly posted.
Right. Yeah.
There's a
Right.
lot of
Shout out
little
Seth.
crazy. Yeah, shout out Seth.
I think Kansas is one you can pursue in the track without permission. But if they tell you to get out of here, you got to get out of there. But you can cross that line.
Okay.
Without the permission.
Yeah, that's crazy. There's got to be other ones, obviously. The reason that Ohio just jumped out is because we're out of state. You know what I'm saying? And you're always you're a little bit more nervous. Like if I was back home, I might, not bring my bow or my gun, but the area, right? Because a lot of those areas are ones you hunted, so Johnny lives next door.
Yeah.
You bumped into him at the corner store getting a coffee. He's all right.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But somewhere else is a little bit different, But especially someone for you being a registered tracker or whatever the case may be. I know this is kind of crazy, but I want to kind of really circle back because we were talking about the 120 hours later, and you had talked about the scent something was absolutely perfect, and we never circled back on it. So for tracking with a dog, you said that the scent control or the scent something was perfect.
Scenting conditions.
Scenting conditions. Okay, so what exactly are scenting conditions?
Yeah, perfect. And I was just getting ready to bring that up too. So let me ask you a question first. Let me ask you guys a question. Now you probably have cell cameras, but you back before the cells, or maybe you have some out. You have to go pull the cards. And as avid as you guys are, I presume you like to do it in the right conditions to minimize your impact in the area, right? Mm-hmm. What conditions do you like to go pull your cards?
In the rain.
Why is that?
Well, you're going to prove me wrong. I already see this. There's a reason why you asked this.
So I'll let you off the hook, Trav. That's a bad time. So think of it like this. Scenting conditions: hot, dry, and windy are bad scenting conditions. Cool, calm, and wet are great scenting conditions. So let me expand on that a little bit. And remember when we were talking about scent pools, scenting conditions are scenting conditions. It's not, well, hot and dry is good scenting conditions for deer, but bad for a dog. No, scenting conditions are scenting conditions. So the reason hot, dry, and windy are bad is, when it's hot, thermals are a thing, they have been, it's becoming more and more of a thing that we talk about. But even when I was a 20-year-old bow hunter, 30 whatever years ago, there were articles about thermals. Well, as the ground warms up, the thermals lift. So the hotter it gets, the thermals lift. And so it's lifting scent off from the source, whether it's the hoof print, with the interdigital scent, all of the things in that scent cocktail we've talked about. So, and if it's sunny outside, the sun is just beating on it and baking it, and in essence, just cooking it away. And dry is bad because then there's no moisture for those scent molecules to attach to. So it just in essence evaporates it, turns it to dust and lifts it away. And then of course windy is bad because it just moves the scent. So you get the sun baking on it and it's hot and it's dry. It's turning that scent to dust. The wind blows it away, the scent goes away. That's why hot, dry, and windy are bad. Cool, calm, and wet is great because let me put it another way, and I'll finish my thought. But if you think about, you guys have dogs or have had dogs, I presume.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what your dog smells like dry. Now get your dog wet. How does your dog smell wet?
Like a wet dog.
Like a wet dog.
Like a wet dog. It smells stronger, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is an example of moisture enhancing scent. So the same thing happens with all scent in the scent cocktail from the deer. So the science behind, I'm not a scientist, but nor have I ever played one on TV. But the scent, like I just said a minute ago, the scent particles can attach themselves to the moisture particles and it holds scent. And cool, so that's why in calm, obviously, because it's not moving the scent around. It's good. The dog can get it all in its nose, and the scent is staying there. And cool is just because it's not baking it away. It's easier on the dog. It's easier on us. But the big thing is because you can have hot and wet conditions and still be good scenting conditions. It might be a little harder on the dog just physically because the dog's hotter, but it's still good scenting conditions. So moisture is a good thing. And the same thing applies to deer. Last year here in Michigan, the early season was incredibly dry. It was very dry. Scenting conditions were terrible. And handlers were struggling, but a lot of deer were being shot. Well, part of the reason a lot of deer were being shot and a lot of good deer is because the scenting conditions were bad for deer too. If it's bad for a dog, it's bad for deer. So
Right.
That's why, Trev, when you're out there thinking that the rain is washing your scent away, it's not. It's holding your scent. You want to go out on a bluebird, high pressure, sunshiny day and let your scent just fry away, as opposed to on that rain where it's just attaching itself to all that moisture and it's just holding there.
That's so crazy because so many people in the hunting space literally scout when it's raining, when it's crappy out. And what's funny is now that you say this, I totally get and understand it because when I had bird dogs, in the morning was one of the toughest times to hunt when it was cold out because that scent didn't dissipate or it wouldn't emit for far. You know what I'm saying? So they would always have a tougher time because
were they frosty mornings?
Frosty mornings.
Frost is bad because now frost encapsulates the scent.
Exactly.
And it can't. So when it's frosty mornings, trackers wait until the frost burns off before we go because the frost encapsulates the scent and it makes tough scenting conditions.
And it's also good for hunting because your scent stays close to you in the tree stand.
If you're frosting over, I suppose.
So, Matt, the scent still stays there, correct? So,
yeah. Yep.
If you shoot a deer in the morning and you're going to wait to track with a dog, midday warms up, thermals rising, bad tracking. Tail end of the day, it's cooling off. Dew point, low pressure, thermals are coming back down. Is it now still just as good to track?
Yeah.
later
Sometimes
that evening than it was
sometimes
midday. So the scent,
sometimes it's better.
the scent trail's still there.
The scent's
You're
still
just
there.
with the thermals, you're just fighting being able to pick it up. But when the thermals come back, you're right back on the trail.
Yeah, there's plenty of story. And again, I haven't. I will tell you, I've noticed a very distinct difference in the way my dog tracks when it's that light, beautiful, light fall rain, and wet compared to just the dry, crunchy leaves that the squirrels make you nuts in. There's a very distinct difference in the way the dog tracks. It's easier in the rain, but so to your point, Steve. Yes, there are times, you know that that scent is it's been hot and the scent's no good. The dog struggles. You go back the next morning after it rained that night, and it's totally revitalized that scent, and the dog tracks like it was just shot, an hour ago. So that is 100% valid. And the man trackers, they're hot tracking for the most part, but they can pick and choose a little bit. Deer trackers we go when it's right to go for the most part, from based on the evidence, not necessarily the conditions. But if you can pick when to go on a track based on the conditions, that's exactly what you're going to look for. You're going to look for that, maybe first thing in the morning after the sun, after it burns off, or maybe right after or during a light rain, or maybe in the evening, when it's the thermals are coming down, it's cooling off, the dew starting to, and you got to be careful because dew can encapsulate the scent too. But, the point is, evenings and that as it's cooling down, and it's better conditions than high noon on 70-degree day in the early season, so absolutely. And we talk about Glennon is a 120-hour-old track, legitimate track. Is the conditions were good, and there was a lot of moisture. I think it had rained at some point, so that it just kind of kept the track fresh. Now it's not, obviously wasn't as good as it would have been at 12 hours, but it was good enough for his bloodhound to acquire it and track to it. That's amazing to me.
All right, let's get on the topic. I've been waiting for this topic. Fixed blade, mechanical.
Yeah.
What do you think?
What do I think?
Yeah. What are your thoughts? Do you think that you have a better kill rate, or with a fixed, or a mechanical?
So there's again, I want to requalify my limited experience, but I've read a lot on this topic. I've listened to listen, man, I'm serious. And I've listened to a lot of other trackers in the network who have data. I've listened to a lot of other trackers nationally who have legitimate data.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot to consider here. So, generally speaking, most trackers are going to favor a fixed head on a well-tuned setup, so your arrow is flying true, because penetration is king. Okay, so I don't know if you guys have heard of Tracker John. He's a tracker for a lot of the outdoor show celebrities. He tracks out of Illinois. He tracks for the juries a lot. Tracker John Angleton. Oh, I'm forgetting his last name. Some version of that. He's just renowned. He is incredibly respected and incredibly accomplished. And so, he was asked this question on a podcast, and he says, well, tell me where you're going to hit the deer, and I'll tell you what broadhead you should use. So his point to that is, if you're going to hit the deer in the guts, a great big giant 2-inch cut mechanical is fantastic. If you're going to hit him in the shoulder, you want a fixed blade, moderately heavy arrow, well tuned, so you get the penetration. And then even then on a shoulder, that's um, a risk. So most of the tracks, generally speaking, that trackers go on for bow hunts are largely mechanical. But why is that? Part of the reason is because there's one mechanical broadhead company who are incredible marketers. They sell the most broadheads than anybody. So you would have to find a way to normalize the data of broadheads sold, versus broadheads tracked,
Right.
to know. So you'd have to normalize that. So yes, there's most tracks are mechanical, but that's also the highest selling broadhead in the industry right now. But if we step back and think about things a little bit, I shoot mechanicals right now. I'm eventually going to switch over, but I shoot mechanicals right now. And it takes, I just said it a minute ago, penetration is king. You want penetration. You want the arrow to go as far, completely through the deer if you can, but as far into the deer as possible. And just by nature of a mechanical broadhead, it takes a lot of energy to deploy the blades. So you're dissipating energy in blade deployment, and it takes it away from the ability to penetrate. So, and that's just physics. You and I, or no broadhead company or no hunter invented physics. It just is. It takes energy to deploy those blades. Mechanical broadheads against bone are are do not do well. They are not bone crushers. I don't care if you're shooting a 125 Montec G5 that's one solid piece of steel. You need to stay the hell away from bone anyway. But that broadhead stands much better shot against a scapula than any mechanical. So, there's a lot of controversy there. So, yeah, if you're going to hit them behind the ribs, a great big old fat 2-inch mechanicals better than a fix. If you're going to hit them forward in dense material, whether it be a whole bunch of muscle or bone, you're better suited with a fixed, well tuned, to get penetration. So I'll give you. I shoot a crossbow. Hate me if you want to. I'm okay with that. And I use mechanical broadheads. And a couple of years ago, I shot a buck, and it was a murder scene. He was broadside. He was 40 yards, and it was incredible. But I've shot 4 or 5 deer with my crossbow and those mechanicals. I only had one pass through, and I never did find the arrow. I think it went off in beans fields. I couldn't find it. Only one pass through, and I've hit the deer pretty good. And it just takes, because it takes energy to deploy those mechanical blades.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Steve?
I'm just trying to wrap I get it.
Hey, look, man, those mechanicals on that 160, I think my son-in-law scored it at 158 buck that I shot a couple years ago. It was beautiful. And the first deer I ever shot with my crossbow was, oh my gosh, I saw the deer, the blood just pouring out of that thing. And it was a quartering away shot, so you hit them in the ribs and you hit them right. Those mechanicals are great.
Right.
There's no question about it. But when you want to talk about, the things you can't control as a hunter, the deer stepped just as you released, you didn't see the twig, right, all of the things that come into play, and you hit something marginal, it just depends.
And we
it just
always
depends on where you hit it.
We talk about the what ifs, right? The deer jump stringing you, the deer stepping forward, the deer stepping back. I mean, there's the one ifs. What if you hit a branch or whatever the case may be. Like there's always those variants for
Yep.
failure, right? Like that's just part of the game. And one of the things is like these things happen. And like you were saying before with mechanicals not getting complete pass-throughs. I shot a deer
Yep.
what was it? I don't know. My biggest deer to date. I shot in the shoulder and it didn't get a complete pass-through. So it only had one
Yeah,
hole
you're right.
and no blood. No blood, right? It
Yeah,
blew
right.
through the shoulder and then it came through and it just punctured the skin on the opposite side. A little bit quarter in
So you
two.
did get both lungs then. You got fatal
Yeah.
penetration.
I mean, I heart punched this deer. I mean, this deer went
Yeah.
25 yards and piled up, but it
Yeah.
was dark out. By the time I got out of my tree, it went into some thick things. But the thing is, I didn't get a complete pass through, and
Yep.
and you're nervous, right? And I guess that's one of the good
Mhm.
things about hunting with a camera. Like we were talking cameras and stuff, is that
Yeah.
you can always check back and be like, okay, yeah, I did good in this. Yes, okay, all right,
Mhm.
it's dead. Let's track on. But
Sure.
I wouldn't know. Like if I didn't find a piece of the arrow or whatever the case may be, I would have probably called the dog at that point. I mean, it was an option, right? And that
Yeah.
thing maybe went 35 yards into some thick stuff. I thought I heard it crash, but I don't know. And at this point, you don't have blood and whatever the case may be
Yeah.
because you don't have two holes. And when you don't get a complete pass through, you're not that blood has to build up in the deer cavity, then start to come out before you're able to get it. You know what I'm saying? So there's like so
Yeah.
many things where you're like, if I had two holes, there would have been blood everywhere, and then I wouldn't have
And
had to worry about it.
think about where you hit the deer. Not only does it have to, fill up and then start to come out, think about how far it's got to go before it gets out.
Right.
There's a lot of muscle there. There's a lot of, bone structure there. So you're what, 2 inches or something before the blood even gets to the outside of the hide or hair,
Right.
when you hit up in there. So yeah, you're right, man. More holes is better, no question about it.
Well, we were talking about this last night at dinner too, and it was brought up on a podcast. Steve, what podcast was that was brought up about with
It
having
was
one hole?
one of Dudley's. Dudley had I don't know the guy's name, but he's basically a
Doctor.
trauma surgeon. Yeah, trauma surgeon. And he was talking about when you only have one hole on it was pretty specific. Single long hit deer, one long, one hole. The pressure builds inside because the gases don't have anywhere to escape, and it will actually collapse the other lung. Which is why you see in when you see in Saving Private Ryan, and
Yeah.
someone gets shot with a bullet, and they stick the straw in them to relieve the pressure
The knife and
inside.
straw, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know. I like
if
two
they
holes.
can't
I
get
like
out,
two
yeah.
lungs and two holes and be done with it.
Yeah. This is
Yeah, exactly.
we're not surgeons to be able to even have this conversation, but what it comes down to is it was talking about one hole, and then if in not having the second hole, it doesn't relieve the pressure, so then it actually collapses the second lung. And I was like, so how do you shoot for that? That was my question.
don't.
So how do I shoot for that? Like, talk to me.
Well, yeah, the first hole would have to be plugged, though. I mean, the first hole, if it doesn't get plugged, would vent.
Well, right,
Well,
because you don't have a complete pass through.
In theory, it would be plugged because the arrow's still in there.
Because you're shooting the off what it comes down to, and that was my point. It's shooting the offside shoulder. You're shooting and hitting the offside shoulder, not getting a complete pass through. It's just those are crazy variances. Like those are just
Yeah.
wild, right? Like that's not gonna happen. Like it's just not the case that at hand.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
I do want to ask, what do you think was the craziest experience of being on the trail that you've had thus far? Have you had like one of those like just wild, like what in the world am I doing?
I mean, probably the weirdest one wasn't necessarily, it was. So you asked me this question, and this is what comes to mind for me again with my limited experiences. As I got a call last year for, we got a double for you. Like, oh geez, okay. And this was early in the season. So they tell me about it. They, two brothers sitting in their pop-up blind on the edge of the field together. Deer steps out. One of them shot and it went that way. Then another deer was out in the field, and that brother shot at that one, and it went that way.
Oh my
And
gosh.
they said one of them was a gut shot, and they're not sure about the other one. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, um, the one that they thought they could, no, they thought one was forward, one was gut. I'm like, well, the gut shot I can't track tonight. I says the one that shot forward, I says we can give it a shot and see. I says, or we can wait and track them both tomorrow. I said, what do you guys want to do? But I'm not tracking the gut shot tonight. And they said, well, we'd like to have you come down and let's at least get the one. I'm like, okay, cool, no problem. And this was a awesome scenting condition day. Light rain. It had been raining for several hours, and it was still lightly raining. It was just beautiful. So they come out there. They show me, okay, here was the deer, and there was the other, where the other deer was, and there's the arrow from the other deer. We stuffed it in the ground. I'm like, okay. So we took off on trying to get the one that they thought was chest shot or forward shot, and where they thought the deer went. So the dog takes off, and it generally goes in the right direction, and then she makes this big loop and goes up towards the arrow in the ground where the gut shot deer was. I'm like, damn it, she's smelling that arrow. I can't let her go after that. So we come back, we try it again, and she does the same thing. I'm like, Chase. We come back, she does the same thing. I says, guys, I says, I can't pull her off this track again. I'm just gonna let her go. So I just let her go, and I'm being the good handler and minding my own business, just following my dog. And lo and behold, maybe 100 or so yards later, we're standing over a deer with two holes in it. They both shot the same deer. So
Oh
whatever
my.
deer ran off that way, it went this way, and then it come back around or something. And I'm like, guys, you shot the same deer. So that was a little freaky, but it didn't make me wonder what I was doing out there. It can, I was thrilled to death that my dog knew exactly what the hell she was doing, and far be it from me to question her. But that was quite the interesting deal.
And that goes back to show the things that you run into, right? Like as far as like, you're going into these situations, and I think, and I think about it, after we had done part one, and then we're doing part two, I'm thinking about all of these things, and I'm like, he's literally a superhero. Like literally a
No,
superhero.
no,
You're going,
no.
well, no, let's be honest, because you're going into these situations, you have no control. There's no variables for you. Like you are just dealing with the things at hand. And all the times that I've been on tracks, and I bet you Steve can definitely say the same, that you go to these things and you're like, why did he just do that? Why did he do that? What in the
Yeah,
world did he think that was a good idea? Like
yeah.
why? You know what I'm saying?
Oh
And
yeah,
then
yeah,
you
yeah,
literally are basing everything that you do on those shit storms, literally shit storms, because
yes,
that's what you're
yeah.
getting
That's
yourself
true.
into. Is like
That's true.
because they're calling you when things have already gone so bad they have no control, and they now
Yeah,
need somebody to put the pieces of the puzzle back together. And that's,
yeah,
I mean, that's got to be pretty wild, honestly. It's always fun, right? It's cool,
yeah.
but like you never know, and then it's always your fault. It's always your fault. You did something wrong, your dog sucks, whatever the
Oh
case
yeah,
may
yeah.
be,
Your
right?
dog,
Like,
your dog doesn't know. Yeah, and hey, trackers are going to make mistakes once in a while, but generally speaking, it's not the. So what I tell people, I said, look, um, there are three things that can impact the outcome of a track. The hunter controls two of them. The tracker controls none of them. Shot placement, what you do after the shot, and weather conditions. None of those the tracker have anything to do with. The hunters has 2/3 of them, and he can control both. I mean, with the exception of the things you can't control. I mean, you practice, but shot placement, regardless of whether it's intentional or not, the deer step is still the hunter, right?
mm-hmm.
And and it just is. I mean, we just can't say it's not. But the tracker doesn't control any one of those three. Now a tracker can screw up a track. I mean, don't get me wrong. You get a bad tracker out there that does it, is just out there to collect a little cash and take his dog for a walk in the woods, doing it not in good faith. They're, I think, far and few between, but they're out there. So you could get that guy. But generally speaking, the well-intended lion's share of the tracking teams out there, they're doing it for the right reasons, and what they tell you is most likely, the likely scenario.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And it's tough. It's tough for people to swallow. They want their deer. They think they smoked the deer, and it's just getting them to understand. We're therapists to some degree. Getting them to understand. That the dog knows.
And
it can be tough.
When you come from, like I have a different mindset than maybe somebody else, or, me, Steve too, he definitely has a different mindset when you call a dog, because we've trained dogs, we've been around dogs, we understand that you have to trust a dog. The dog's knows better than you know. And a lot of the times, we talked this in part 1, where you can screw up the dog as the tracker with the dog. It's not the dog's fault. The dog has the bloodline to do what it needs to do. It has the skill set to do what it needs to do, and it has the nose. And the handler is what becomes the problem in the whole entire situation.
The handler is always the weakest link.
Mm-hmm. Not knowing the dog. You admitted it. Your first pup.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I made mistakes last year. There's no question about it. I did a whole my own little podcast. I did a whole podcast on the what I learned in one season of tracking, and I was pretty transparent in where I made mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only way to get better. I could pretend like none of those deer were dead. Well, that's bullshit. I screwed up sometimes. I know where I screwed up, and I applied what I learned on the tracks this weekend. I went on a 2 mile shoulder shot deer that I think the dog caught up to. She went off lead for a period of time there, and I think she caught up to the deer a couple of times in this 7-foot tall grass field, and then she just broke bay and the deer went away. But one of the things I learned last year is I left the deer. I'll be transparent here on this right now.
Yep.
I left the deer in the woods. We were 20 yards away from it when the hunter and I kind of said, okay, man, it was a property issue, sort of, but 20 yards away. And that just, when he called me later that winter, that spring or whatever, and told me, it ripped my guts out that we were that close. It was a liver shot. And in that, I've always heard people say, just go an extra 100 yards. So that drove it home to me. Damn it. When I'm ready to call this track, I always consult with the hunter about whether or not we should pursue anymore. If he wants me to, we will. We just talk about it. But whenever I think we should probably think about calling this track, another 100 yards. We just got to go another 100 yards. And I applied that and ended up going 2 miles last weekend on a live deer. So I applied what I learned, because damn it, that wrong. It just ripped my guts out,
And that's to be had, right? Like you learn. Yeah. It's just like being a big buck hunter. You screw up, you learn, you do it again. Or being, a duck hunter. You screw up, you learn, you do it again. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And that's just part of the game.
It's just called experience. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's experience. And the humble, good faith guy is going to learn from that and apply it in any context. It doesn't matter. The guy that's too smart by half, they can't screw up in their mind.
And they're never going to learn and never become better.
Right. Exactly.
That's the way it goes. Well, Matt, I guess I'll ask you this question again, because I probably should. Do you got a different answer for what drives you outdoors?
I've been thinking about that, man. I think it was going to come up, and I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. It's just in the blood. It's just who you are, and I can't explain it. And if I have to explain it to somebody that doesn't get it, they're not going to understand it anyway.
Yep.
So no,
Mm.
I don't have
All
another
right.
answer.
I
Nick.
just,
I'm
you know,
sorry.
I didn't know.
I'm sorry.
Maybe you turn a new
Yeah.
leaf in a week. I don't know. You know, I figured I'd ask again.
Did studied for the test.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
I didn't, man.
Matt, this has been truly amazing. Absolutely love it. I think there's a lot of good information that one could take from this as far as the part one in, you know, reading the sign after the shot for the hunter. And then even part two, we talked a lot about the dogs and whatever else, but there was a lot of good information, scents, digital glands. You know, there's a ton of that good stuff. And honestly, you know, you say that you don't have a lot of experience, but your wealth of knowledge definitely over trumps the experience, in my opinion.
I appreciate that, but yeah, I'm
No,
learning.
I'm willing. I mean, I'm really looking forward to see where this journey honestly takes you, man, because I think you're doing everything 100% correct and learning how to do it, learning from it, and then applying it and moving on, man. So I'm really
appreciate
looking
that.
forward to it. And we can't thank you enough for jumping on with us, man. It's been an absolute
Anytime.
pleasure. 2 weeks in a row, couple hour conversation. It's been absolutely
it.
great.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate you guys having me, man. I do it again in a second. So it's been a ton of fun. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
One last time, man. Just tell everybody where they can find you. They can check you out, check out your podcast, check out your videos, check out your Facebook, so on and so forth.
Tails on Trails deer tracking. Just put it in the search bar and whatever media you want, whether it's a podcast platforms, Facebook or YouTube. That's where I'm at. I'm not an Instagram, TikTok guy, but Tails on Trails deer tracking on Facebook, YouTube, and podcast platforms, and you'll find me.
Awesome. Thanks again, Matt, and thanks everybody for listening. Until next week, thanks for taking the ride right here on the Outdoor Drive.